The UK's new Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says the country is in a profound economic crisis and promises to fix the mistakes made by his predecessor. Rishi Sunak was formally appointed this morning by the King. He is Britain's third Prime Minister in just 7 weeks.
I will unite our country, not with words, but with action. I will work day in and day out to deliver for you.
With her husband and daughters, Liz Truss left Number 10 for the last time after just 49 days in office and wished Mr Sunak every success.
Our country continues to battle through a storm. But I believe in Britain. I believe in the British people. And I know that brighter days lie ahead.
Meanwhile, the cost of living crisis continues as many food prices soar. Some, like pasta, tea and cooking oil, up by 65% in a year.
In our area, there's a lot of people that rely on pensions, rely on benefits, and if they're not supported, businesses won't continue to thrive because there'll be nobody to use us.
And stay with us here on BBC News for continuing coverage and analysis from our team of correspondents in the UK and around the world. Hello, good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. We are live in Downing Street. I will unite the country, not with words, but with action. With that message, just over an hour ago, outside Number 10, Rishi Sunak, the UK's new Prime Minister, began his premiership. He is the third Prime Minister in just 7 weeks. But today, he promised he will fix mistakes made by Liz Truss. Well, now, behind that famous door, just behind me, the work really begins this afternoon, initially on naming his first cabinet. Well, earlier, Mr Sunak went to Buckingham Palace, where the King formally appointed him Prime Minister a short time after Liz Truss had also been to see the monarch to resign after just 49 chaotic days in office. Our first report this lunchtime from our political correspondent, Ione Wells.
The world's eyes and ears, and Liz Truss's loyal aides, crowded here again just weeks after they gathered to hear a very different speech. A chapter opened that day, reflected on today.
This government has acted urgently and decisively on the side of hard-working families and businesses. We reversed the national insurance increase. We helped millions of households with their energy bills and helped thousands of businesses avoid bankruptcy.
But amid her wins, a hint at her failures.
As the Roman philosopher Seneca wrote, it's not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It's because we do not dare that they are difficult.
Critics argue it was her very dare to cut taxes and borrow so greatly that led to such economic difficulties. She left with the message that she still stands by her plans for growing the economy.
It means lower taxes, so people can keep more of the money that they earn.
Liz Truss's departure from Number 10 for the last time as Prime Minister leaves Rishi Sunak with tough challenges in the driving seat. He was clear in the summer he won't follow her plan to cut taxes until inflation is down. After officially being appointed Prime Minister today by the King, he said he'd been elected to fix the mistakes made by Liz Truss.
I admired her restlessness to create change. But some mistakes were made. Not born of ill will or bad intentions. Quite the opposite, in fact. But mistakes nonetheless. And I have been elected as leader of my party and your Prime Minister, in part, to fix them. And that work begins immediately.
He didn't shy away from highlighting mistakes that led to Boris Johnson's resignation either, who claimed this week it was his mandate in the 2019 election that would have placed him well to win another.
This government will have integrity, professionalism and accountability at every level. Trust is earned, and I will earn yours. I will always be grateful to Boris Johnson for his incredible achievements as Prime Minister, and I treasure his warmth and generosity of spirit. And I know he would agree that the mandate my party earned in 2019 is not the sole property of any one individual. It is a mandate that belongs to and unites all of us.
Rishi Sunak also said that he wants to unite his party, but why does that matter when, as he said, people are struggling with economic hardship right now? Well, as Liz Truss found out the hard way, it's very difficult to govern effectively and pass policies if you can't get your party to back you.
That starts today, as he will begin having to decide who stays and who goes from the top jobs in government. He'll want to show he can bring together different wings of the party, those loyal to him and those who backed his rivals, while avoiding the rifts that led to policy clashes at the very top of government under Liz Truss. Meaning, just weeks into their jobs, Liz Truss may soon not be the only one moving out. Ione Wells, BBC News, Westminster.
Let's get the thoughts of our chief political correspondent, Nick Eardley, who joins me here right now in Downing Street. Nick, what did you take from that speech here on the steps of number 10 from Rishi Sunak? He talked about how this will be a government of integrity, of professionalism, and talked about the mistakes of his predecessor.
It was the tone, Ben. It was Rishi Sunak trying to be sober and sombre and say to the country that there is a difficult economic time ahead. And we saw him spell out that there are difficult decisions that he's going to make in number 10 with whoever his Chancellor is. He said that his predecessor had made mistakes and that he was determined to fix them. So what is that setting us up for? Well, some of the tough decisions that the Treasury is working through at the moment. Potentially big spending cuts coming, spending squeezes in a lot of government departments, potentially tax rises as well. But I think what Mr Sunak had decided overnight was that he needed to stand in front of the country and lay it all on the table to say that the economic situation is not good, that there is a difficult time ahead and that he is going to have to make some of those decisions. They are going to be incredibly unpopular with the public, with opposition parties, also I suspect with some of his own MPs.
And in the next few minutes and hours, he's going to have to make some possibly unpopular decisions about who's in his cabinet and who's in his government.
His reshuffle starts immediately. He's down in the Commons already speaking to some MPs. 2 prominent departures from government that we can confirm in the last few minutes. Jacob Rees-Mogg, a key ally of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, has resigned as Business Secretary, potentially jumping before he was pushed. Brandon Lewis, the Justice Secretary, has resigned as well within the last few minutes. I would expect there to be some significant departures still to come. I'm checking my phone for that very reason. We may well get more of them in the next few minutes. But then the real work starts of appointing a new cabinet, telling us whether Jeremy Hunt stays as Chancellor. No confirmation of that yet, although that is the widespread expectation at Westminster, that changing Chancellor now would be too risky. And then we'll see who else is in Rishi Sunak's top team.
OK, Nick, you keep checking your phone. We'll be back to you later. Thank you very much indeed. Well, King Charles only came to the throne a few weeks ago, but Rishi Sunak is already his second Prime Minister. Today at Buckingham Palace, he said farewell to Liz Truss, appointed by his late mother, Queen Elizabeth, shortly before her death. Well, after that goodbye, the King then made his first prime ministerial appointment and asked Rishi Sunak to form a government. Let's go to our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell, who is outside Buckingham Palace. And Nick, it's been a very busy morning for the King.
Well, it has indeed, and of course the first time that King Charles has presided over this transition from one Prime Minister to another. The last time we saw this process was just 7 weeks ago today. That, of course, was up at Balmoral, just 2 days before the death of Queen Elizabeth, the last formal duty that she performed to invite Liz Truss to form a government and to become Prime Minister. We remember that photograph of Queen Elizabeth with Liz Truss, the Queen looking very frail. The choreography today, just the same, outgoing Prime Minister, incoming Prime Minister, except of course that it was here at Buckingham Palace. And I think it will have been a matter of particular satisfaction to King Charles that the first Prime Minister that he has appointed is Britain's first Prime Minister of colour, a man of Indian origin. We remember Charles's commitment, which we saw of course as Prince of Wales, to diversity, to multiculturalism, to diversity of faith, and of course now there is the prospect that at his coronation in May, the British Prime Minister will be a Hindu.
Nick Witchell, thank you very much indeed, our royal correspondent there at Buckingham Palace. Well, it has been a meteoric political rise for Rishi Sunak. He only became an MP 7 years ago, elected by the voters of Richmond in North Yorkshire, and now here he is behind me in number 10 already. At the age of just 42, he is the youngest politician to hold that office in modern British political history. Graham Satchell has this report.
It is quite a moment in this country's political history. Rishi Sunak, the first British Asian to make it to number 10, and at 42, the youngest Prime Minister since 1812. So what do we know about Rishi Sunak?
Let me tell you a story.
Using a series of slick campaign videos, Rishi Sunak has told his own story. His Indian-born grandparents came to the UK from East Africa in the 60s.
My mum studied hard and got the qualifications to become a pharmacist. She met my dad, an NHS GP, and they settled in Southampton.
Sunak's parents wanted the best for him. They sent him to Winchester, a private school, the oldest in England. He was filmed with his mum and dad for a BBC documentary.
At Winchester, I was one of very few Asians. I mean, the first generation into that level of society. It does put me in an elite, of achievement, definitely in society. But I'll always consider myself sort of, professional middle class.
Rishi Sunak became head boy at Winchester. He went to Oxford, then Stanford University in America, where he met his future wife, the daughter of an Indian billionaire. Together, they're estimated to be worth more than £700 million. After working at Goldman Sachs and then 2 hedge funds, he stood for Parliament in Richmond in North Yorkshire. He was 34. Less than 5 years later, he was Chancellor, thrust into the public limelight in the pandemic.
We're setting up a new coronavirus job retention scheme.
The furlough scheme saw his popularity rise and rise, but there have been big bumps in the road. Controversy over his wife's non-dom tax status, a fine for attending a party at Downing Street in lockdown, and he will never be forgiven by some Tories for resigning as Chancellor and effectively ending Boris Johnson's premiership.
We can be better, and we will be better.
Rishi Sunak describes himself as patriotic, a family man, proud of his Indian heritage and Hindu faith. He's also a bit nerdy. Listen to this.
So I collect Coca-Cola things. Oh, for real? Yeah, I'm a Coke addict. Total Coke addict. Yeah. Coca-Cola addict. Yes, for the record. I was going to say, for the record, just be totally clear.
He admits to being a huge Star Wars fan, says he wanted to be a Jedi. He's now Prime Minister, the third Tory Prime Minister in 7 weeks, and he faces a mountain of troubles ahead. Graham Satchell, BBC News.
Well, the fact Rishi Sunak entered number 10 today as our third Prime Minister in 7 weeks highlights this period of extreme political and economic turbulence that we've been living through. But what do the voters around the country make of the extraordinary events we've been witnessing here at Westminster? Well, the Don Valley constituency in South Yorkshire had been held by Labour for nearly 100 years before it returned a Conservative MP in the last general election. Our correspondent Fiona Trott has been there to see what people there make of Britain's latest Prime Minister.
It's Halloween half-term.
Nice and careful.
And at this farm in Doncaster, they're focusing on 2 things.
Oh, have we done it?
Keeping the children busy
unite our country.
And keeping an eye on Westminster.
Well, it is going to be really hard, isn't it? I mean, people, you know, they're struggling now with the bills, the energy bills, the shopping bills, everything's going up. Because I'm having to help my kids out. I pay for the shoppings now. I give them handouts all the time because they can't afford it.
I found his speech quite inspiring, actually, to think that he's acknowledging the fact that our country is in an economic crisis. He sounds to me like he's admitting that he's got a tough job and he's willing to put in the work.
Not a lot of detail there, though, on how he can reassure parents like you.
Yeah, I was listening out for that level of detail. Unfortunately, didn't give too much away on that, did he? But I suppose, you know, he's not been Prime Minister for long. I think we need to, you know, give him the benefit of the doubt.
Let's have a look at this one.
Farm owner Ruth has high hopes after hearing the speech.
As Chancellor, Rishi Sunak really supported us. We have 30 staff here almost, and the furlough meant that we were able to pay them and not worry each week about how we were going to pay them. The business kept running when we weren't sure if it would do or not, so we're hopeful that as Prime Minister he will do something similar. In our area there's a lot of people that rely on pensions, rely on benefits, and if they're not supported, businesses won't continue to thrive because there'll be nobody to use us.
Constituencies like Don Valley need growth. Can that be achieved without passing debt onto the next generation? Fiona Trott, BBC News, Doncaster.
And the time is 16 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. The UK has its third Prime Minister in only 7 weeks. Rishi Sunak was formally appointed this morning by the King. And coming up, we'll bring you the latest on the cabinet reshuffle that is now underway here in Downing Street. And stay with us here on BBC News for continuing coverage and analysis from our team of correspondents in the UK and around the world. Well, Rishi Sunak takes over as Prime Minister with some of the toughest, most daunting challenges faced by a Prime Minister in recent memory. Among them, the ever-present demands on the National Health Service, especially as we approach winter and the inevitable rise in the number of patients needing treatment. Then there is the war in Ukraine. Can the new Prime Minister maintain the same strength of commitment in supporting the Ukrainian government? It was a key priority for both his predecessors. But above all, it is, of course, the cost of living crisis and the deep-seated problems with the economy that the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, now Prime Minister, will have to grapple with right away. Our economics correspondent, Andy Verity, has this assessment.
This is Rishi Sunak's constituency, the small market town of Richmond, one of the more affluent towns in North Yorkshire. But at a cafe here this morning, the customers, like others up and down the country, were feeling the pinch, as official figures reported prices of even budget food up 17%.
You can see it on the shelves when you go into the supermarkets. You've got to really think about making better choices.
Now we're buying more foods that's maybe not as healthy because it costs less.
Ultimately, the cost needs to come down, or people's income needs to go up, and that's really the only place that it can really be fixed.
Because of higher prices, consumers have been shelling out more money for fewer goods, and that's starting to have a knock-on effect on business owners amid warnings of recession.
The biggest thing we're noticing is people are starting to really cut back now on the kind of bigger luxuries. So, particularly our breakfast trade, we notice it, because I suppose that's more of a luxury thing than going out for lunch. So there's a real struggle all about the place. I guess it's just bad news everywhere.
So what could Rishi Sunak do now as Prime Minister to improve an economy that ran into trouble when he was still Chancellor?
Prices of basic goods are going up for global reasons. Pasta, for example, where the supply of wheat has been disrupted by the war in Ukraine. The world's biggest exporter of sunflower oil, up 65%. Or tea, pushed up by higher transport costs and fertiliser costs. There's not much a new Prime Minister can do to tame those global inflationary forces, but what they can do is act to try and stop that inflation becoming embedded in the domestic economy.
Economic theory says governments can slow down inflation by reducing demand, the amount of money everyone has to spend, by, for example, raising taxes, which would also close the so-called black hole in the public finances.
a new UK-wide 1.25% health and social care levy.
But it was Sunak who brought in Boris Johnson's big tax rise barely a year ago and reversing it.
Almost all the tax measures announced
is the one big change in the mini-budget that Jeremy Hunt decided to keep. The alternative is cutting spending.
If we look at the gap that there is in the finances, there's still around about £38 billion that need to be found over the course of the next few years. So the focus is going to be very much on how do you fill that gap that remains in public finances.
Sunak's new government faces a sobering reality. If it cuts spending or raises taxes too soon, it can make the impending recession worse and any recovery weaker. The man who as Chancellor borrowed and spent more than any other in peacetime, as Prime Minister, is much more constrained. Andy Verity, BBC News.
Well, here in Downing Street today, Rishi Sunak warned of difficult decisions that lie ahead. Indeed, the economic situation is significantly worse than it was when Liz Truss took over. Let's get some analysis from our economics editor, Faisal Islam, who joins me from central London. And Faisal, the outgoing Prime Minister Liz Truss said brighter days lie ahead, but potentially also some really, really difficult days as far as the economy is concerned.
Yes, a very different tone from the new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, of course, a former Chancellor who presided through profound economic challenges in terms of the pandemic and the economic impact of that, but entering office in a very, it wasn't just the words actually, it was a sort of sober occasion, no kind of whooping, cheering aides or his family. Even when he waved from that door behind you, it was a kind of very stern and serious face. Why? Because he's trying to communicate a serious message. He used the C word, crisis. That's not a word that, Downing Street under Liz Truss were saying we're definitely not in a crisis. Well, he embraced that idea. And what is this? There's a certain degree of expectations management. You come into office and you assert how bad things are. But that list that he gave is the reality, that we are still suffering from the after effects of the pandemic, from war in Europe and the consequent energy crisis. And when you combine those things together with an inflation crisis and, yes, the mistakes that Rishi Sunak has acknowledged on behalf of his predecessor Liz Truss, you do get a very sensitive moment. So that was a message for the public to try and prepare them for the tough decisions. But I also think to his own MPs, because the only thing that he thinks that could also twist this back into a problematic situation would be if Parliamentary Conservative Party, if the MPs cause more trouble and deflect him from his course.
Faisal, thank you. Faisal Islam, there, our economics editor. And let's also now talk to our health editor, Hugh Pym, who is at St Mary's Hospital in West London. And Hugh, we've talked about the economy, but the NHS also a huge priority for the new Prime Minister.
Well, that's right, Ben. It's a priority in all the UK's nations, in the NHS right across the country with extreme pressure. But we're talking here today, of course, about England because health is devolved. And the NHS in England is going to be a major challenge for the new Prime Minister right now, with ambulances queuing outside many hospitals because they can't hand over patients because of delays in A&E. And the reason there are delays there is because it's difficult to find beds for patients to be moved into who need to be admitted. And that's because there are some patients in hospital wards who are fit to go, but they can't because of problems in the community with social care, finding placements and rehabilitation. And only last week, the Care Quality Commission regulator said the system was gridlocked and it needed a major set of responses from the authorities, from the government longer term. But short term, it's hard to see what can be done. We're not even in winter yet. Winter always brings a lot of pressure on hospitals and the whole NHS system, and we've had predictions of a COVID and flu wave. Longer term, though, it's about money, and the NHS leadership is suggesting that all the gains they've been offered for the next year or so have been wiped out by inflation. They need more money, and they're looking to next Monday's statement. They need more money, or they might have to cut back on some services.
Hugh, thank you very much. Hugh Pym there, our health editor. And let's also talk about international reaction to the news that Rishi Sunak is now Prime Minister, and inside number 10 there behind us, James Landale is our diplomatic correspondent. Britain's been a bit of a laughingstock internationally with so many Prime Ministers in such a short space of time. What has been the reaction to Rishi Sunak's appointment?
Well, what's interesting is a lot of the comments that have been made by world leaders have spoken of his British Asian origins, Indian origins. It's clearly resonated. President Biden, the US president, didn't quite get his name right. He called him Rishi Sunak. But he said, look, it's still quite astounding that this man is in Downing Street. He said it was a groundbreaking milestone, which makes the point even if it breaks the metaphor. But Narendra Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, he spoke of UK Indians being what he called a living bridge between his country and the UK. President Buhari of Nigeria said, look, just the fact that Rishi Sunak is in there will encourage so many young people across the Commonwealth. What they all want, though, behind all the warm words, is political stability, and that's what they're looking to see if he can provide.
What about Ukraine? It was such a huge priority for Boris Johnson, also for Liz Truss. Will it be the same sort of priority, do you think, for Rishi Sunak?
Well, I don't think you can avoid it. I mean, the flag of Ukraine is still flying above us at the moment. He's promised that he will maintain the British policy of supporting Ukraine as much as possible. In the past, he's always spoken about trying to make Kiev an early visit. The one question mark is this, is that he has not committed to increase defence spending as much as Liz Truss promised. She said she wanted to spend 3% of national wealth by 2030. He hasn't matched that commitment, calling it an arbitrary target. Now, if the UK is to support Ukraine militarily for many years to come, to ensure Ukraine's security, that is going to need defence spending. And so there's a little question mark over that about how far he's willing to do that. For the moment, he's keeping his cards close to his chest.
James Landale, thank you very much indeed, our diplomatic correspondent. Now let's bring you more on the news that Rishi Sunak has been formally appointed the UK's new Prime Minister today. He is inside the House of Commons, we are told, beginning his cabinet reshuffle, and our deputy political editor Vicky Young is in the Houses of Parliament right now. We're expecting to get some names pretty quickly, aren't we, Vicky?
Yeah, we are, and it is all happening. As you say, the Prime Minister is in his office, which is not very far from here, just one floor below, and you can see those who are losing their jobs going in to meet him. So I just bumped into Jacob Rees-Mogg in the last half hour. He said that he resigned this morning. He has been in to see the Prime Minister, and Jacob Rees-Mogg said to me, look, he said, I've been so close to Liz Truss's administration, it wouldn't have been right for me to serve under Rishi Sunak, and he probably wouldn't have wanted me anyway. But he said he was absolutely 100% behind the new Prime Minister, because he said if the Tory party doesn't come together, then it is toast, is what he said to me. Brandon Lewis, the Justice Secretary, he's also resigned, and we have seen other people going in there as well. So Robert Buckland, who has been the Welsh Secretary, seen in the area, but no confirmation yet about him. The appointments, though, haven't had those yet, and I've been speaking to lots of MPs, many of them very close to Rishi Sunak, who say they really don't know what his plans are going to be. He's kept it very, very tight. Some said it's been hermetically sealed, this process, and that's how he wanted it to be. He hasn't promised jobs to anybody, including Penny Mordaunt, I'm told. So we will have to wait and see once it's all official.
We'll have to wait and see indeed, and he hasn't promised any jobs, but at the same time, he has talked about uniting the party. He has said unite or die. Does that mean he has to bring in people from all wings of the party?
Yeah, that is the expectation here. And of course, as ever, it's about making room for all of these people. He's got a lot of his own people who have been incredibly loyal to him. He's not going to be able to find space for all of them. He's going to have to bring in people from all wings of the party. Again, I've been talking to lots of ministers today, and some of them saying, look, there might even be former cabinet ministers who will be offered positions a little bit more lowly than they're used to. But actually, if the party is serious about making this work, then they should accept those. So I think all eyes will be on that kind of thing happening as well.
All right, Vicky, for the moment, thank you very much. That's Vicky Young, our Deputy Political Editor. Well, it's a rather nice afternoon here in Downing Street. This morning, there was a partial solar eclipse, and let's get a weather forecast with more on that with Stav Danaos.
Thanks very much, Ben. Good afternoon to you. Yes, of course, if you heard Ben there was a partial solar eclipse across the UK this morning, and the weather's been pretty kind for that. You can see where we've had clear spells with some hazy sunshine at times. This is where we've seen some of the best Weather Watcher photos of this eclipse. I've got a number of them behind me. This one taken in Staffordshire. The clouds there actually used as the filter. A great one here in Monmouthshire of an aeroplane just flying at the right time of capture there. And this darker, moodier one, obviously using a filter, shows the eclipse there in Inverness in the Highlands. Now, for the rest of this week, it's staying mild. We will have bouts of wet and windy weather interspersed with days like we've had today with quite a bit of sunshine around. It's going to feel very mild both by day and by night. One such wet, windy spell will be moving up from the south this evening and overnight, mainly across western areas. That's going to be dragging up very mild air from the Azores, particularly from tonight onwards. Temperatures this afternoon in the sunshine up to around 18 degrees, a little bit lower further north and west where we have a bit more cloud, a few showers. But it turns wet, windy across southwestern areas this evening. That wet, windy weather spreads its way northward. Some heavy bursts of rain, winds turning gale force across some Irish sea coast, particularly western Scotland. But look at those temperatures, 11 to 14 or 15 degrees from north to south across the country. So Wednesday's a blustery day. We'll have heavy rain moving away from northern Scotland. That'll be followed by a rash of blustery showers, mainly in the north and the west, one or two across the south, but some good sunny spells around with that mild air mass despite the strong winds and also the sunshine. We could see temperatures up to around 20 degrees or so across some southern and eastern areas. We hold on to the breezy conditions as we move out of Wednesday into Thursday. Cluster of weather fronts moving up from the south, bringing more rain or showers or longer spells of rain. These spreading their way northwards through the day on Thursday. But again, where we have some sunny spells and that very mild air mass in place, we could be looking at temperatures about 6-7 degrees above the norm, up to around 21 degrees or so across southern and eastern areas, mid to high teens further north. We hold on to this picture as well through Friday into the weekend. Bouts of wet and windy weather moving northwards, interspersed with a little bit of brightness on Saturday, and then we'll see more rain pushing northwards during the course of Sunday. Some of the rain could be heavy, may even be thundery. Details a little bit sketchy this far out. Stay tuned to the forecast. But here's the outlook, staying mild then throughout Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Some heavy rain at times. Let's stay tuned to the forecast. Back to you, Ben.
Snav, thank you very much indeed. Well, the reshuffle is underway. The new Prime Minister is busy working on his ministerial appointments. We are hearing that Wendy Morton is out as Chief Whip and heading to the back benches. Jacob Rees-Mogg and Brandon Lewis, we heard and reported earlier on, have left the government, both resigned as Business Secretary and Justice Secretary respectively. Well, as we have been reporting, the UK now has its third Prime Minister in only 7 weeks. Rishi Sunak was formally appointed this morning by King Charles. There will be continuing coverage on the BBC News channel, including all of those cabinet reshuffle appointments that we're expecting in the next few hours. In a moment, here on BBC One, the news where you are, but first let's leave you with some of the images and moments of the last few hours after yet another momentous day in British politics. From all of us here in Downing Street, thank you for watching.
Our country continues to battle through a storm. But I believe in Britain. I believe in the British people. And I know that brighter days lie ahead. Thank you.
Together, we can achieve incredible things. We will create a future worthy of the sacrifices so many have made, and fill tomorrow and every day thereafter with hope. Thank you.